Yeah, it's been a hot minute, hasn't it? I truly apologize for the delay, but 2024 was rough for me, y'all. Principally because I left my longtime job shortly after completing episode 3 of Fox Kids Club, and I spent most of the year trying to find something. I've since found a new position, and that's given me enough stability to really start concentrating on this series again. And more than that, I've decided to shift the episode order around. I know I said Peter Pan the Pirates is next, but that episode is more work than I anticipated. So instead of delaying Fox Kids Club even more while I try to get it done, I've decided to make that episode the finale of the 1990-91 season. My goal for 2025 is to get through this season and start moving towards the really good stuff that we'll start to see in 1992-93. I do want to get to X-Men before the world completely goes to shit, y'all. Anyway, let's get this thing started. Few cartoon pairings have been as iconic or longer lasting than Tom and Jerry. Conceived in 1940, the series put MGM's struggling cartoon department on the map, earning 7 Academy Awards and setting new standards for cartoon violence in the process. But while the characters continued to appear in new cartoons after the original studio was shut down in the 50s, and its creators went on to pioneer television animation, nothing seemed to really stick. But times had changed. The characters had passed in ownership from MGM to Ted Turner, and the public was really craving classic cartoons in the wake of Roger Rabbit. So why not team up with the original creators again and do new Tom and Jerry cartoons, but with a twist? Well, here's your result. Tom and Jerry in pint-sized form. This is Tom and Jerry Kids.
Kids Club!
Kids Club!
It's the Tom and Jerry Kids. Gotta be there where all the action is. Tom and Jerry Kids. The Tom and Jerry Kids show. Big tail, little tail, chasing all around. It's a cat and mouse game that never lets down. Well, there's Spike and Tyke, Droopy and Dribble. Come on and have some fun, it's so simple. Talking about the Tom and Jerry Kids. Come on and be where all the action is. Tom and Jerry Kids. The Tom and Jerry Kids. The Tom and Jerry Kids News Show.
Hey, if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, it helps it in the algorithm. Also, sign up at patreon.com/JessMatthewsProductions to support my videos. And you can also contribute $50 for a pick of the week single episode review of any kid show out there. Your support makes everything I do possible. Thanks. Tom and Jerry, the very first creation by William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, is the story of a cat and mouse who, I guess, frenemies is probably the best word to describe what they are. Most cartoons are some variation of Tom, a cat, chasing Jerry, a mouse. I say most cartoons because there are some exceptions, like ones where Tom and Jerry are working against a common foe, or at least the direct conflict isn't explicitly between the cat and the mouse. Sometimes they're battling depression. One notable aspect of the series is that the lead characters almost never vocalize outside of yelps, screams, and the occasional "No, you believe it." This has made the series a favorite in international markets. Each half hour of Tom and Jerry Kids consists of 3 shorts. Every episode, save for 2, features at least one short with Little Tom and Little Jerry. These are reasonably close to the original shorts, where Tom and Jerry are almost always antagonists. The only major difference is that the characters have been de-aged. Well, okay, Tom has been de-aged, redesigned to be a kitten wearing a baseball cap. It's honestly hard to tell if Jerry's even supposed to be younger in this version. There's no changes to Jerry's character model. The eternal chase happens, well, wherever the plot dictates it happens. Sometimes it takes place around the house. Sometimes they'll hit the beach. And occasionally we'll get Tom and Jerry kids in space. There's also some concessions to modern culture. Jerry will join a rock band or get help from Batmouse. Stuff that would be familiar to a kid in 1990. Most episodes also have one short featuring Droopy and his son Dripple. Like Tom and Jerry, Droopy also hailed from the MGM studio, but unlike Tom and Jerry, he was created not by Hanna-Barbera, but Tex Avery, for my money the greatest animation director of all time. Droopy was introduced in the 1943 film Dumb Hounded as a sluggish, mild-mannered bloodhound who nevertheless is there to catch and escape convict Wolf at every opportunity. This comedic device actually surfaced in earlier Avery works, most notably his second cartoon with Bugs Bunny, Tortoise Beats Hare. Dripple is actually not entirely a creation made for this show. He appeared in earlier Tex Avery cartoons, but this series gave the character his name. Droopy and Dripple are usually placed in conflict with that loud, obnoxious wolf. Here, he's named, McWolf. McWolf? Really? Droopy, Dripple, and McWolf are often joined by the lovely nightclub dancer from Avery's Red Hot Riding Hood, here named Miss Vavoom. Who came up with the names for this segment? After that, the third most common recurring segment is with Spike and Tyke, the father and son bulldog pair that appeared in a number of classic Tom and Jerry cartoons. Spike was a frequent foil for Tom and Jerry in some of the duo's more memorable entries, like Quiet Please and The Truce Hurts. His son Tyke was introduced in the 1949 short Love That Pup, and two shorts featuring just Spike and Tyke were made before the MGM studio closed down in 1957 and Hanna-Barbera started producing cartoons for television. But while Hanna-Barbera couldn't make Spike and Tyke cartoons anymore because the characters were owned by MGM, they clearly liked the characters enough to basically do We Have Spike and Tyke at Home. Hence Augie Doggie and Doggie Daddy, a more domesticated version of the two characters that premiered on the Quick Draw McGraw show. Unlike Tyke, Augie Doggie has a precocious voice provided by the Great Dolls Butler, while Doggie Daddy bears the Jimmy Durante type voice Spike had in later shorts. Augie Doggie and Doggie Daddy would become part of the HB posse in later years, showing up as part of the ensemble cast in shows like Yogi's Gang and Laugh Olympics. What's funny is that the Spike and Tyke shorts here take clear inspiration from Augie Doggie. Like, they give Tyke a voice here, and he basically sounds exactly like Augie Doggie.
Now when we get in the woods, I'm gonna teach you all about nature, Augie, my son.
But, dear old Dad, what could you teach me?
Well, for an instance, you see that duck up there?
Quack, quack.
He's flying south for the winter.
Gee, I better warn him.
Oh, Tyke, I'm home.
Dad, oh, Dad, he came and visited me after all.
I knew he would, son.
He did all his stunts, flew around and everything.
So basically, Hanna-Barbera creates Spike and Tyke at MGM, then they make their own Spike and Tyke at their own studio, and then they do Spike and Tyke cartoons way later, but those cartoons are basically copies of the copy. I have a headache and I need to lay down now. There are other characters in the cast, mostly in the Tom and Jerry kid shorts. This is not unlike the original shorts, which would often throw in other characters in an attempt to liven up the proceedings. The original series featured characters like rival cat Butch, Tom's prospective love interest Toodles, and Jerry's French-speaking and cold-blooded nephew Nibbles.
Pauvre Pussycat, c'est la guerre.
We're off, going and daring and fighting and daring.
What separates Tom and Jerry Kids from the original shorts is that there is far more reliance on these side characters, many of whom have extensive dialogue. Perhaps the most notable character introduced in this cartoon is Calaboose Cal, a fast-talking huckster cat voiced by the late, great Phil Hartman. You can tell they like this character, and it's hard not to like Hartman doing a riff on LA used car salesman Cal Worthington.
How do you do, how do you do, how do you do? Allow me to introduce myself. I'm Calaboose Cal of the Calaboose Cal Mouse Raster Company of Costa Mesa, California. No job too big, no job too small. When Cal's on the job, he creams them all. Got a mouse in the house, Cal don't care. Just can't get rid of him, Cal don't care. Got a lazy, good-for-nothing cat that can't do the job? That's when Cal cares.
Hey friends, if you're out buying a car, you ought to drop by Worthington Ford, see me first. Just see me first, give me first chance at the deal, and I'll give you 2 free dinners at Victoria Station. All the barbecued ribs and all the barbecued chicken you can eat at Victoria Station. And no purchase is necessary. You don't have to buy a car from me. All I want you to do is see me first, give me first chance at the deal. But you talk about a giant selection of cars, just acres and acres and acres and acres and acres and row after row after row after row of cars and trucks on sale out here.
Calaboose Cal was just one part of a busy season for Phil Hartman, who was still on Saturday Night Live at the time. 1990-91 was the season he began voicing 2 of the greatest creations in the history of The Simpsons, Troy McClure and Lionel Hutz. The show was produced by Don Jurwich, a longtime veteran of the animation scene in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Jurwich got his start on Rocky and Bullwinkle and Tennessee Tuxedo before jumping to Hanna-Barbera at the end of the decade, where he worked on shows like Wacky Races and Scooby-Doo. He then worked at Marvel Productions for a few years in the mid-80s, most notably as supervising director on G.I. Joe, before returning to Hanna-Barbera later in the decade, where he stayed until the mid-90s. One of the show's supervising directors was Ray Patterson, who was actually a really notable name. He worked on many of the classic Tom and Jerry shorts of the 40s and 50s, so it's really cool that he worked on this show. He's also notable for being the Ray in Grant Ray Lawrence Animation, the producers of the first season of the highly beloved 60s Spider-Man cartoon. When Grant Ray Lawrence went under, he essentially became a Hanna-Barbera lifer, working at the company right up through the New Adventures of Captain Planet in 1993. Towards the end of production, a few notable names began to trickle in layout and character design roles: Lance Falk, Butch Hartman, David Feiss, and Jim Stenstrom. This was the beginnings of the youth movement at Hanna-Barbera, a movement that would fully take root with 1993's SWAT Cats and Two Stupid Dogs. These people would go on to contribute to some of the most beloved cartoons of the 90s and 2000s. So, that's Tom and Jerry Kids in a nutshell. It's a pretty typical cartoon for the early 90s. But the franchise it belongs to is anything but typical. It's one of the most beloved classic cartoon franchises of all time. So let's take a look at how we got here. How Tom and Jerry ended up as Tom and Jerry Kids. In 1940, the MGM Cartoon Studio was struggling. A recruitment drive brought them some of the top animators in Hollywood, but those animators were saddled with a Captain and the Kids adaptation that was completely DOA. In this environment, Joseph Barbera, a fresh transplant from the Terrytoon studio in New Rochelle, New York, teamed up with fellow animator Bill Hanna, who got his start at the Harman Ising studio where he worked on the first Looney Tunes. Looking for a cartoon idea that was actually, good, the duo decided to make a cat and mouse cartoon. They planned their cartoon with an unorthodox method. We wanted to present something more than a storyboard, but less, of course, than a finished cartoon. So we invented what we came to call limited animation in order to produce a demonstration film of the cartoon. I laid the cartoon out as I wrote it, and Bill shot my full-size layouts directly. The technique used far fewer drawings than a fully finished cartoon, fewer than 1,800, but these were shot to length, so that the film produced by means of limited animation would run as long as the final product. We used various shortcuts to get as much movement out of the technique as possible. For example, instead of using a lot of drawings to animate walking legs, I would take 2 drawings and alternately reverse the legs to give the impression of movement. We'd use zooms and pans to suggest other kinds of movement, and if we needed to indicate the effect of a head-on collision, Bill would just whack the side of a camera. The resulting effort, which did not credit either of the 2 directors nor any of their animators, was Puss Gets the Boot, in which a cat named Jasper chased an unnamed mouse. After the shorts released in February of 1940, Hanna-Barbera were given a strong recommendation from the studio. No more cat and mouse cartoons. Yeah, the studio hated the cartoon, but favorable audience reaction, including a letter from a major exhibitor asking for more cat and mouse cartoons, quickly led MGM to change course. After an internal studio poll, the characters got their names: Tom and Jerry, coincidentally reviving a name used on an unrelated series at the earlier Van Buren studio. Funnily enough, Joseph Barbera actually worked on those cartoons. The Oscar-nominated Puss Gets the Boot was one of the highlights of what proved to be a very strong year for animation. Walt Disney released his masterpiece that year, Fantasia. Woody Woodpecker made his debut for Walter Lantz. And most notably, Bugs Bunny made his first real appearance for the Leon Schlesinger studio. So Hanna-Barbera got to work making cat and mouse cartoons. And only cat and mouse cartoons. For the next 17 years, the duo directed dozens of Tom and Jerry shorts almost exclusively. And while they were popular right away, it took time for the shorts to find their trademark pacing and violence. Part of this was that the studio was shaking off the kinks. Studio executive Fred Quimby brought in Hugh Harman and Rudolph Ising to supervise the MGM cartoons after their studio shut down. Harman and Ising were 2 ex-Disney animators who, at times, were obsessed with beating Disney at their own game. Harman and Ising's MGM work was typically lavishly animated, beautifully detailed, and painfully slow. Speaking personally, I always hated those cartoons when they showed up on TNT. Shortly after Puss Gets the Boot hit it big, Harman and Ising left MGM, and into their void stepped Tex Avery. Tex was about as much of an anti-Disney as you can get. He was the man who made the Looney Tunes actually loony, and he established the style that every other director at Termite Terrace would end up following. However, he'd leave Warner Brothers after a conflict with his boss, Leon Schlesinger, and would end up at MGM, where he'd have an even larger budget than he had over at Schlesinger's studio. Tex never worked on the Tom and Jerry cartoons, but by the mid-1940s, his influence was undeniable. The Tom and Jerry cartoons got faster, more stylized, more violent, less interested in being realistic, and more interested in being funny. The upshot is that the cartoons ended up being considered some of the most violent of the golden age of animation, and that would cause problems when the shorts were released to television years later. Also causing problems, the racist content sometimes present in the shorts. MGM relied on blackface jokes and stereotypical black characters long after other animation studios largely retired those gags. For example, they mar what is otherwise Tex Avery's finest short, Magical Maestro. There are more blackface gags in Tom and Jerry than you'd think. 19 cartoons feature a character called Mammy Two Shoes, a stereotypical uneducated black maid who is Tom's owner. We only see her from the waist down. These cartoons aren't just controversial today, they were controversial at the time. In fact, pressure from the NAACP caused MGM to finally retire Mammy in 1953. Despite featuring a basic premise of a cat chasing a mouse, Tom and Jerry shorts were often brilliantly inventive. You could put these characters anywhere. Cleverly done war references, getting into mischief at a bowling alley, antagonizing each other while Tom is trying to do a piano concerto. Sometimes the shorts would even break format. Jerry exploring New York in The Wonderful Mouse in Manhattan, or Tom trying to avoid eternal damnation in Heavenly Puss. Remember, all of these premises take place with minimal, if any, dialogue. The 114 shorts directed by Hanna-Barbera are considered to be the series' peak. It was enormously popular commercially and critically, with the series getting 13 Oscar nominations and winning 7 times. Compare that to Bugs Bunny, who was nominated only 3 times and won just once. And that film, Nighty Night Bugs, is generally seen as one of the Wabbits' weaker entries. But the good times were never gonna last. As the 40s and 50s progressed, 2 things managed to eventually spell the end of the theatrical animated short. The first was the Paramount Decree, which prohibited the major studios from owning their own movie theater chains. MGM was owned by the Loews Theater chain, which ultimately spun off the studio by the 1960s, beginning years of tortured mismanagement. But the Paramount Decree also prohibited something else, a practice called block booking. To simplify everything, block booking forced independent theater owners to take everything a studio produced. A theater might just want the A picture with Bogart and Bacall, but the studio would force it to take unwanted or unproven B pictures beside that. And yes, block booking also included all of the shorts and cartoons a studio was making. So the decree made that practice illegal, and easier for theater owners to just opt out of receiving shorts. The second, of course, was the emergence of television. The explosive growth of the new medium in the 1950s had a massive effect on moviegoing. Why go out when you could just watch I Love Lucy at home? Studios began introducing new innovations just to compete. 3D, Cinerama, CinemaScope. In fact, MGM produced a number of widescreen CinemaScope cartoons in the mid-1950s. All of these disruptions led MGM to initially cut costs dramatically. Cartoons from the 50s still looked pretty good, but nowhere near as lush as the series' 1940s peak. Tex Avery's unit was shut down in 1953, though Michael Law directed a few droopies afterwards. Eventually, MGM came to a fateful conclusion. The Tom and Jerry cartoons were successful and showed no signs of flagging, but the studio's Arthur Lowe Sr. reviewed the books and concluded that re-releasing an old Tom and Jerry would bring in 90% of the income generated by a brand new one, without, of course, any of the cost of new production. At the time, early in 1957, it was Bill and I who ran the MGM cartoon studio, but the call, and it was just a single phone call, came down from the front office, not to us, but to our business manager. Close the studio, lay everybody off. MGM closed down their in-house cartoon studio on May 15, 1957. While at first it looked like their careers were over, Hanna-Barbera looked to that new medium that the movie studios were treating with disdain. One problem was that television couldn't afford the comparatively large budgets that theatrical animation required. but they had a solution to that too. Remember that limited animation technique that they had pioneered for Puss Gets the Boot? Well, Hanna-Barbera decided to expand upon it and codify it for television animation. They formed their own studio, which became known as Hanna-Barbera Productions, and recruited most of their animators from MGM to set up the new studio. HB's cartoons for the small screen would use a fraction of the drawings required for a theatrical cartoon. Character designs were radically simplified, more complicated actions would happen off screen, and characters would only move when necessary. This allowed the studio to bring in each of their cartoon shorts for just $3,000 each, a far cry from the $65,000 that Tom and Jerry required by the end of their run. The studio focused heavily on creating memorable characters that could carry the cartoons, and it worked. The initial years of the studio produced many classic characters, such as Huckleberry Hound, Yogi Bear, Quick Draw McGraw, Top Cat, and the studio's arguable pinnacle, the Flintstones. All of these were kept in circulation for decades on television stations around the world. While Hanna-Barbera Productions was thriving, Tom and Jerry also had a life beyond their creators. The characters were still popular in theaters, so MGM decided to commission new shorts. Starting in 1960, Gene Deitch was tasked with directing a series of new Tom and Jerry cartoons from behind the Iron Curtain. Because of that, these shorts stick out immensely compared to almost every other Tom and Jerry short ever produced. That's thanks largely to the visibly limited animation and, well, their profound weirdness. The Deitch run is divisive. You either love them or you hate them. And I'm in the love them camp. They're not great cartoons, but that weirdness is, to me, actually quite charming. After 13 of these shorts, MGM moved production back to Hollywood and contracted recently fired Warner Brothers legend Chuck Jones to direct 33 more cartoons. The animation is improved dramatically, but aside from that and an absolutely charming title sequence, these shorts are seen as lackluster, and a lot of this is honestly a mismatch between the director and the series itself. Jones, by his own admission, never really got Tom and Jerry. Jones's most famous chase cartoons remain the Coyote and Roadrunner shorts, and at times it feels like those characters are cosplaying as Tom and Jerry. Jones's tenure at MGM wasn't all bad, because it was here that he directed one of his finest works, the animated TV adaptation of Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas. The Jones team also helped with the initial packaging of the cartoons for television, which included censoring the installments with the racist Black May caricature by retracing, recoloring, and redubbing her as a white woman voiced by the legendary June Foray. While the final shorts were released in 1967, Tom and Jerry, like so many other classic theatrical cartoons, became huge television successes. According to 1979 press advertising from MGM, Tom and Jerry was the #1 kids cartoon in syndication, even scoring some choice 7:30 p.m. time slots in some cities. I personally grew up with Tom and Jerry, with fond memories of watching all the cartoons every weekday afternoon. Despite being so terrified of the MGM lion, I'd run from the room in fear. Seriously, that lion was so threatening. In 1975, Hanna-Barbera were reunited with the duo when MGM commissioned their studio to produce the Tom and Jerry show for ABC. The problem was that the new show was produced for Saturday morning and thus aimed explicitly at kids. Compare that to the original theatrical shorts, which were aimed to all audiences. Censorship standards by 1975 were far tighter than when the original cartoons were originally released to television. The result is a weird show, where the characters, almost always portrayed as adversaries prior to this, were now the best of friends. cartoon violence was kept to a minimum. So the theme song's a banger, yes, but when these shorts were run alongside the theatrical classics, they were so boring. I hated these things. This was followed by a 1980 effort by Filmation for CBS, the Tom and Jerry comedy show. This was a mixed bag. Sure, they at least returned to the classic chase format, which is a plus. But it was produced by Filmation, a studio who is routinely considered the worst animation studio ever. Where HB's 1975 effort was a bad idea decently executed, the comedy show is a decent idea with horrendous technical execution. The animation is cheap and lifeless, and the music is absolutely wretched. This is a problem because there's no dialogue, so the animation and music have to be top notch, and when they're not, the short collapses. This would be the last Tom and Jerry effort produced by MGM. MGM's fortunes had been declining for years, especially under the ownership of Kirk Kerkorian, who used the name on hotels and casinos before combining the studio with United Artists. In a long sale process, Ted Turner would first acquire MGM from Kerkorian, then in a matter of months sell the studio back to him. But Turner opted to keep most of the MGM film and TV libraries, which by this point included every MGM film produced prior to 1986, every Warner Brothers film made prior to August 1st, 1948, a number of MGM and UA TV efforts like Chips and Gilligan's Island, and last but not least, Turner now owned a sizable number of theatrical cartoons. The pre-1948 Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies, every theatrical Popeye, and of course the MGM shorts including Droopy and Tom and Jerry. These shorts would enter heavy rotation on Turner's cable networks. Meanwhile, Hanna-Barbera entered a slump as the 1980s dawned. At its 1970s peak, it controlled a staggering 80% of the domestic TV animation market, almost entirely on Saturday mornings. But by the 1980s, its market share was dwindling, largely due to the breakthrough successes of newer animation studios like Marvel Productions, DiC, and co-owned Ruby Spears. It largely missed the boat on the syndication boom, opting to exploit its library of characters rather than go all in on toyetic properties. By 1988, classic cartoons were in vogue again. Roger Rabbit was taking the box office by storm, and Joseph Barbera was looking to the past. The 50th anniversary of his partnership with Bill Hanna was fast approaching, and thus so was the 50th anniversary of Tom and Jerry. This prompted him to make contact with Turner Broadcasting and discuss a partnership to do something with the Cat and Mouse team. Turner was enthusiastic and the two quickly came to a deal. They would make a full-length Tom and Jerry movie. At that point, however, there was restructuring at the studio's parent company, which became known as Great American Communications. The new owners decided to bring in a new president to the studio, David Kirshner. We're going to talk more about him in our next episode, but Kirshner advised the studio to pull out of the movie project. Ultimately, Film Roman produced the movie for Turner, and the results were, well...
I'm Tom.
I'm Jerry.
You talked!
So they didn't do the movie, but the two sides clearly still wanted to work together. Ultimately, a new TV iteration of Tom and Jerry was put into development. As Turner wanted to keep this new show separate from the 300 theatrical and TV shorts it was still syndicating, the decision was made to do a new, kidified version of Tom and Jerry. This was something Hanna-Barbera was, in a word, obsessed with, having recently produced Flintstone Kids and Pup Named Scooby-Doo for Saturday morning. Turner and Hanna-Barbera announced Tom and Jerry Kids in July of 1989, and Turner made the decision to really invest in this show, giving it what Variety described as a theatrical-type animation budget. While Turner had their cable networks as a possible home for the new show, the budget required to bring it in at the quality they wanted meant that they needed to make the show for broadcast television first, either for the big three networks on Saturday morning or first-run syndication. And that's where Fox Kids comes in. In previous episodes, I said that the original Fox Kids lineup was assembled by executives who weren't involved with the network, as Margaret Lesh was still tied up with her Marvel contract. I've since spoken to Lesh, and according to her, that is false. No lineup was ready at the time she was actually able to start at Fox in March 1990. This was 6 months before the network was scheduled to go on the air, so they were scrambling. But she was able to use her connections, and Tom and Jerry Kids was still available to be picked up. When the first Fox Kids lineup was announced in April of 1990, Tom and Jerry Kids was included as one of the inaugural Saturday morning titles. It was ready to go on day one of Fox Kids, September 8th, 1990.
If you're mad about laughter,
It makes me mad, 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 mad.
if your heart bumps for thrills,
You manly hunk-a-hound, you.
if you go crazy over cute,
You want cute? I'll give you cute.
then knock yourself out
It's become sort of a sport.
and join the fun with Tom and Jerry Kids, Droopy and Dribble, and Spike and Tyke.
You know, it always pays to advertise.
Saturday at 8 a.m. on Fox 24.
It even got a special week of shows from October 1st through 5th, 1990, subbing in for the troubled Peter Pan and the Pirates. So Fox Kids was giving this show a nice push right out of the gate, which isn't surprising, because Tom and Jerry was undoubtedly the biggest known property the new network had at that point. This was something most 7-year-olds knew, either through its enduring presence on local broadcast stations or the growing number of households that could see it on Turner's cable networks. The classic shorts were still in wide circulation when Fox Kids started airing the show, and that was essentially a selling point. Hey kids, you like Tom and Jerry, right? Well, these are new Tom and Jerry shorts made for the 90s, and you can only see it on this new network. It was also a natural pickup for Margaret Lesh given her history. She previously worked as a supervising executive at Hanna-Barbera from 1979 to 1983. So she was on a first-name basis with Joseph Barbera. When the show was being shopped around, naturally she was an interested buyer. And the show, by all accounts, did pretty well on Fox Kids. The first year of the network was challenging, because the network put a lot of muscle behind the failure that was Peter Pan and the Pirates. There were also some notable strikeouts on the Saturday morning schedule. But Tom and Jerry Kids was one of a number of shows that did well enough to make it to the network's second year, and it was one of only 2 shows from that first year to survive to Fox Kids' breakout 1992-93 season. Fox Kids ended up commissioning a full run of 65 episodes, making it the network's first original series to land on the weekday roster, the only one in 92-93 not to be associated with Warner Brothers yet, and it predated Bobby's World arrival on the weekday lineup by 2 years. It even did well enough for a spin-off series to hit the Fox Kids Saturday morning lineup in 1993, Droopy and Master Detective, spinning off the Droopy and Dribble characters as Private Eyes. We'll cover that once we hit 1993-94 on the Fox Kids Club calendar, don't worry about that. Droopy's popularity itself was on a bit of an upswing at this time. Not only was he one of the many characters who made an appearance in Who Framed Roger Rabbit, he was also in the well-received Roger Rabbit shorts that were released during Tom and Jerry Kids' run. There is also a weird artifact of Droopy's time on Tom and Jerry Kids that showed up in an unusual place. During the heyday of the Game Boy Advance in the 2000s, the classic MGM characters were licensed out for cheap shovelware video games. Tom and Jerry got a few games, mostly based on later productions, but Droopy got a tennis game that released only in Europe. Why am I bringing this up? Well, because the Tom and Jerry kids' names for the characters were used. Droopy, Dripple, McWolf. So after all of that, just how well does Tom and Jerry kids hold up? Well, my opinion is mixed. Let's start with the positive. It's a far more technically and conceptually proficient reboot than either of the two television reboots that preceded it. That theatrical type budget is pretty evident in most of the episodes. It's of a generally higher quality than a typical Hanna-Barbera entry of the time. This actually looked a lot better than I remember it looking. The animation is often pretty good, with a few episodes crossing over into outright greatness. Nothing that exceeds the shorts from the 1940s, mind you. But for television animation of the era, especially Hanna-Barbera, it's pretty solid. And the visual design as well is pretty sharp. Vibrant colors, attractive backgrounds, character designs that feel real and three-dimensional. They took the time to really make this show at least look the part. And the first short, Flippin' Fido, was at least made with a theatrical release in mind. The high production values of several other shorts make me at least suspect that more were planned before the show was picked up by Fox Kids. The same goes for the conceptual premise of the show. Again, previous efforts to revive the characters took tremendous liberties with the characters. Hell, contemporary efforts took tremendous liberties with the characters. It was nice to see an attempt made to capture the essence of the shorts. Tom and Jerry are antagonists. There's enough of the requisite wild takes and forced wall breaking in the Droopy segments. And Spike and Tyke, well okay, those are Augie Doggy segments and Spike and Tyke drag, but at least that's understandable. Of the three regular segments, the ones I thought were the strongest were the Droopy ones, which shocked me because Tex Avery is such a hard act to follow. Of course, they're nowhere near as good as Tex's classics, but they're a decent enough simulation. Some of the gags are actually really clever, and there's even some high concept ones like the all hip hop Rap Rat is where it's at. You can see why Droopy was the segment to get its own show. But while the show is well made and decently produced overall, there are flaws that start coming through when you start poking around with this show. I'll be blunt. One problem with doing a follow-up to a franchise from the golden age of animation is, well, you're doing a follow-up to a franchise from the golden age of animation. Budgets were relatively high. All the animation was produced domestically, and executive meddling was extremely low. Hell, Harry Warner, one of the Warner brothers, famously thought his studio made Mickey Mouse cartoons. By the 90s, those conditions simply didn't exist. Remember, if Hanna-Barbera didn't have to do limited animation for TV, they almost certainly wouldn't have. It's for that reason that the best follow-ups don't try to directly compete. WB has produced a number of Looney Tunes revivals since 1990's Tiny Toon Adventures, and most actually hold up pretty well. Particularly the ones that are consciously not trying to be the originals. Taz as the petulant teenage child of a nuclear family. An exploration and expansion of Chuck Jones's classic Duck Dodgers. Bugs and Daffy as wacky roommates in a sitcom. Tom and Jerry Kids, unfortunately, winds up in that direct competition bracket. Despite aging down the characters, these are just an attempt to do modern versions of classic cartoons on a television budget. The Tom and Jerry Kids show isn't bad, but at times it comes off as pretty flat. Again, I have to reiterate, this isn't specifically a flaw for Tom and Jerry Kids. The original Tom and Jerry shorts were some of the most lavishly produced animated shorts of the 40s and 50s. That level of craftsmanship, again, could not happen on a television budget in 1990. Even a theatrical type budget that Turner and Hanna-Barbera were giving this thing. There's one thing I think really lets it down as far as the craftsmanship goes: the music and sound design. Tom and Jerry boasted some incredible music by composer Scott Bradley. Shorts like Mouse in Manhattan and The Two Musketeers are vastly improved by his work. Tom and Jerry uses treacly canned music in every cartoon, and it got to be pretty grating as I worked my way through the series. I also couldn't help but notice the arguable overuse of those ubiquitous Hanna-Barbera sound effects in these shorts. Once you hear them, you can't unhear them. The shorts were also produced for kids. Remember, Tom and Jerry Kids was on Fox Kids and was subject to Fox's Standards and Practices department. And they were judging it on a kids show level, not a Simpsons level. That means the show is restrained in the amount of cartoon violence it was able to use. This cuts both ways. The show feels a bit defanged compared to the originals. But I also see some value in that parents can show this to kids as their first introduction to Tom and Jerry without having to worry about the questionable content in some of those original shorts. What I can pin on Tom and Jerry Kids specifically is the listlessness of its writing. Calaboose Cal is a great character, but one can't help but wonder what he would be like if John Swartzwelder or Conan O'Brien was giving him dialogue and not Pat Ventura. Calaboose Cal is a symptom of another problem endemic to the Tom and Jerry segment specifically. I'll just say it, they have Poochie. Actually, no, they have a rotating cast of Poochies. The original Tom and Jerry shorts did have side characters, but what dialogue they had was kept short and sweet. The shorts still focused on Tom and Jerry, and you only saw them every so often. This isn't the case here. These side characters have starring roles, extensive dialogue, and take the focus away from Tom and Jerry. They drive the plot in a way the side characters of the original shorts never really did. Take the short Two-Stepping Tom from late in the show's run. Despite what the title suggests, this short is actually about Tundo, an elephant who appeared previously, here depicted as a country western singer. Tom and Jerry don't even show up until halfway through the 7-minute runtime, and despite being in the title of the short, Tom is really only there to be repeatedly crushed by Tundo. These side characters became so prominent that in addition to showing up all over the show's second title sequence, they got several solo cartoons in the back half of the show's run. My guess is that they were trying to see if any of them could show up either in a solo spin-off or as secondary segments on Droopy Master Detective. Ultimately, nothing ever came of them, but I think the biggest drawback is the emulation of classic cartoons is ultimately surface level. It makes an attempt, but it's held back in enough places that it ultimately feels weak. Specifically, it pales in comparison to two very similar shows that aired during Tom and Jerry Kids' original run, Tiny Toon Adventures and Ren and Stimpy. I'll admit, Tiny Toons is kind of apples and oranges comparison, but it's essentially the same kid versions of classic cartoon characters premise that guides Tom and Jerry Kids. It's also made by a bunch of Hanna-Barbera veterans, most notably Tom Ruegger, who oversaw another Hanna-Barbera kidified franchise, the excellent pup named Scooby-Doo. What elevates Tiny Toons over Tom and Jerry Kids is the production values. Better overseas studios, better writing, and most importantly, fully orchestral musical scores a la Carl Stalling and Scott Bradley. The more direct comparison that I'd make would be to Ren and Stimpy. The crew behind that show also looked to classic cartoons, though more Bob Clampett than Tex Avery or Hanna-Barbera. Instead of being a service-level emulation, Ren and Stimpy adopted the production methods that MGM and Termite Terrace utilized. Storyboards, not scripts, a unit-style director system, etc. The results are undeniable. It's a far more convincing take on, let's do a modern version of the classic cartoons we love. Tom and Jerry Kids was good for what it was. An attempt at doing Tom and Jerry shorts on a larger than average TV budget. But I have to say, it falls a little short of its promise. I'll be honest here. I know I didn't really talk about Fox Kids in this video, but that's because Tom and Jerry Kids didn't have a ton of impact on the network. It was one of only 2 first-year shows that the network didn't have a direct financial stake in, so the promotional muscle was elsewhere. If you turned on your local Fox station, you were more likely to be blasted with ads for Peter Pan and the Pirates, whatever syndicated shows they were offering, and then maybe something for Bobby's World. And that remained true as the network expanded. Tom and Jerry Kids was a comfortable presence on the lineup, but from 1992 onwards, the network's focus was either on the flood of Warner Brothers shows or the continued development of in-house offerings like X-Men and Eat the Cat. This was the first, well, might as well put this on while we wait for Batman or Animaniacs show. And while there's nothing inherently wrong with that, I do think it's a shame because Tom and Jerry Kids is ultimately relaxing, easy fun, even if it does fall a little short of its promise. Tom and Jerry aired its last news show on Fox Kids in late 1993, and reruns continued to air on the network until August 12, 1994. Tom and Jerry Kids would not be the last time Fox Kids went to the classic cartoon well. They picked up Tiny Toons starting in 1991, reruns of the Ralph Bakshi Mighty Mouse in 1992, the classic cartoon-inspired Animaniacs in 1993, the Casper reboot in 1996, and the new Woody Woodpecker in 1999. They even straight up aired old Looney Tunes for a few years. This type of programming was a key part of the Fox Kids programming mix. While the show was enjoying its long run on Fox, dramatic changes were happening behind the scenes at Hanna-Barbera. The most important development was the 1991 sale of the studio to, wait for it, Turner Broadcasting. Not only did Turner own the characters in the series, they now own the studio producing the show as well. While Turner was considered a dark horse bidder for Hanna-Barbera, it's pretty important to note that there were actually some strong ties between the two parties that predated the purchase. Turner aired Flintstones reruns for years prior to buying the studio. As stated previously, they were going to make a Tom and Jerry movie together, and a special celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Hanna-Barbera partnership aired on Turner's TNT in 1989. Both sides had an active working relationship with each other, so when Hanna-Barbera was put up for sale, Turner had enough knowledge to make a serious play for it. When Turner took charge of the studio, they chose to keep it in operation, but made some significant management changes. I'll save the full story for our next episode, but Turner installed a new president with a decidedly different outlook on cartoon production. Tom and Jerry Kids was one of the few shows that survived the ownership change, likely because everyone involved was satisfied with the show. Hanna-Barbera would prove central to one more Ted Turner initiative, and you might have heard of it. On October 1st, 1992, Cartoon Network launched on cable systems across the country. and the first character to be seen on Cartoon Network?
Turner Entertainment Networks proudly present the world's first 24-hour Cartoon Network.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the world's first and only Cartoon Network, the home of the top toon stars. To help you find your way around here, I'd like to personally present
Droopy's Guide to the Cartoon Network.
First things first, you need to be in tune with your new environment.
From what I can tell, he's voiced by his Tom and Jerry Kids voice actor, Don Messick. Cartoon Network would showcase nearly the entirety of Turner's vast cartoon holdings. There were 24 hours to fill, so well-known classics like Flintstones and Jetsons shared space with things like The Gary Coleman Show. Nearly the entire Hanna-Barbera catalog could be seen at one point or another on Cartoon Network. As previous deals expired and the new network's coverage of the country increased, Hanna-Barbera shows would slowly migrate to be shown on Cartoon Network exclusively. Tom and Jerry was, unsurprisingly, a day one pickup for Cartoon Network. Tom and Jerry Kids made the transition to CN in 1995. Tom and Jerry cartoons were popular on the network. Tom and Jerry Kids was a fixture on the schedule until the early 2000s, and the original shorts remained on the network well into the 2010s. After Turner was sold to what was then Time Warner in 1996, stewardship of the Tom and Jerry franchise passed to Warner Brothers, with the Hanna-Barbera studio morphing into Cartoon Network Studios. The franchise proved just as enduring as ever, with WB producing new Tom and Jerry animation beginning in the 2000s. To date, 4 separate revivals, a slew of direct-to-DVD movies, and another theatrical film have all been produced under Warner's oversight. Since then, Tom and Jerry Kids has fallen through the cracks a little bit. Only the first season has seen a home media release, and it's missing from Max, though it was available in full through the Boomerang streaming service until its 2024 shutdown. Its place in the franchise has been obscured, and I do think that's a bit of a shame. Tom and Jerry Kids is worth seeking out. It's not a great version of Tom and Jerry. The originals will always be superior, but it's worth an easy Saturday morning watch. Its impact on Fox Kids may have been minimal, but it helped the network get through those rocky first 2 years. And that's not something to sneeze at. Coming up next, the second of the 2 first-year Hanna-Barbera shows on Fox Kids. It's time to set sail, because we're off to find the 13 lost treasures of Rule. If you want to learn more about Hanna-Barbera, I highly recommend checking out My Life in Toons, the early 90s autobiography from Joseph Barbera. There's a solid chunk dealing with his time over at MGM, and his information about the Tom and Jerry movie helped fill in some of the research gaps in the late 80s. I highly recommend checking it out. Thanks for watching. Sorry this took so long to come out, but hopefully Fox Kids Club will be back on track this year. 2025 promises to be absolute garbage, but I hope my videos this year will ease some of the pain. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon for notifications. Pirates of Dark Water is next, and it's one of my favorite cartoons as a kid. So I'm excited to see if it holds up. Here's hoping it does.